Hello, book club. Today's book is Magic Rises by Ilona Andrews. Ilona Andrews is not an actual person. Interesting fact, it is Ilona and Andrew, a husband and wife duo. This series, it's a guilty pleasure because it's from romance authors that write fantasy. Or maybe they're fantasy authors that write romance fantasy. Quick story. I was in Afghanistan in 2018, and a friend of mine tried to get me to read this series, and I didn't do it. Cut to, a few years later, I'm in Afghanistan in 2020, and this same friend is there with me again, and she finally convinces me to read this series. So I read the first book. I am shocked at how much it drew me in. It's an extremely fast-paced series. It's got a lot of action, and it does have a little bit of a romance tinge. I think I'm getting to the point where I have to admit to myself that I might like a little bit of romance with my fantasy. Yeah, probably. But I'm not yet ready to admit that, so let's skip on. But this Kate Daniels series that we're going over book 6 for, it is an urban fantasy. It's a post-apocalyptic urban fantasy with some romance elements built into it. It's an interesting merging of genres, of a lot of different genres together. At the end of the day, it's just a really fun story. Magic Rises, like I said, is book number 6 in, as far as I can tell, a 10-book series. There's a lot of other short stories, but a 10-book series is what we're looking at so far. Because we're going over book 6 in the series, it's probably a good idea to go ahead and give you a quick synopsis of this world and what's going on in it. First, you can read these books out of order. They are very episodic. They are individual stories. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end, but they do chain together chronologically. And because of that, if you do read one of the later stories first, you will necessarily spoil yourself for things that happen in the previous books. You could read them individually and enjoy the stories. You don't have to start on book 1, but you will spoil yourself. So I would start with book number 1. It starts fast. This series starts fast. They're very quick reads, and I think they're very entertaining reads. I was surprised. Like I said, guilty pleasures here. So for the Kate Daniels series, it's post-apocalyptic urban fantasy. So we're a little bit in the future, and it's post-apocalyptic. There's been sort of an apocalypse event, and it takes place in Atlanta. The post-apocalyptic event has to do with magic and technology. During our time period, pre-apocalyptic, technology was kind of in control of the planet. Technology was on the rise. What has happened is magic has risen again. So magic and technology, these waves, as they're described, are opposed to each other. They don't get along. They're like oil and water. When magic is on the rise, magical things work. When technology is on the rise, technological things work. When magic is strong, technology tends to break down. Skyscrapers have fallen, planes no longer work. Most technology doesn't work during magic periods, what they call magic waves. Some technology does work. Phones, apparently landlines, are mysterious enough to people that for some reason they work most of the time during magic waves, which is interesting to get into the magical theory behind that, but I'm not going to do that. So magic comes in waves and technology comes in waves, and they're battling for supremacy. So people have to carry swords for 1 second and guns for the next, and it can be unpredictable when the next wave is going to come. It adds a bit of danger and flair to this particular world. It's a very interesting premise. Within this world, you have the main character, Kate Daniels. Kate Daniels is a magical individual. I don't want to get into too many spoilers, but she has magic and she's really good with swords. She's a very violent character, but also very interesting because that violence is earned. It's a part of her that was baked in as she grew up. It's just a part of who she is, and it's something she has to deal with, especially later on in the series. I think that's enough to know about the underlying series. Let's get into some of the specifics that you need to know for Magic Rises, since we're starting with Book 6. Magic Rises is kind of a standalone story, somewhat, in that it's an adventure to go get a magical potion to save children. That is way oversimplifying it. It doesn't really do this story justice. Let me try again. Magic Rises is actually more of an adventure story where the characters that you see normally in Atlanta go on an adventure together, some of them. They cross the ocean to go get kind of a magic formula for something that will save children. So it's high stakes, very high stakes. What children specifically are they trying to save? Well, in this post-apocalyptic world, there are were-beasts. So were-beasts are werewolves, were-jackals, were-hyenas, were-bears, were-anything, usually mammals. They have been infected by something called Like V. It's a virus, and that virus allows them to change forms between human and animal. There's a mid-level form somewhere in between called a warrior form that's half human and half animal, and they tend to be stronger than either and very, very dangerous. So there's the warrior form in the middle, which is a mix. So what happens when were creatures have children? Well, their children are infected with the virus. The virus is very hard to control. It's very easy for these were people to basically go insane. They go wild, they go loop, L-O-U-P. Loopism is what it's called. They end up giving into their carnal urges, killing and everything else that goes along with that. All those carnal urges. They become a menace to everyone around them. When they go loop, the other were creatures have to hunt them down and kill them. Often it's their own family members that have to hunt them down and kill them. Because if they don't do it, if they don't take care of their own business, there's a good chance humanity and other organizations in this world will go after all of them and take them all out because they'll be seen as a menace. So it's a self-policing thing. It's very, very sad because a high percentage of children, when they reach puberty, go loop. They go crazy and they can't control themselves because of all the hormones and body changes, and it's also when they first start changing into their animal counterpart, they start being able to change. It's a very difficult time, and a lot of these were creatures, these were people, they lose children, and it's very hard on them. So this story is about a group going across the ocean to the old world, to Europe, because they have a formula there. It's called Panacea. They have this Panacea that dramatically reduces the chance of children going loop, or really anyone going loop. If a were creature is hurt very, very badly, their body is extremely stressed, they could go loop. If they just have poor self-control, they could go loop. They can go loop at any time. This is mostly about saving children, though. It's actually about specifically saving certain children that are currently being put into comas instead of allowing them to go loop and having to be killed. They're hoping to get this formula to save those kids that are already going loop. They're in the process of going loop. Hopefully bring them back and save them, because they're very important characters to the characters who are going across the ocean. They're just trying to save their family and their friends. And also, some of these characters are thinking about having kids. So they want this Panacea so that they can protect their future children. Makes it a little less of a daunting situation. This is an interesting romp, an interesting trip. They're going into the old world where they don't really have any friends. There's a lot going on. There's so many layers to this particular story. So many different characters, so many different powers that are at odds, that it makes for a nice layered cake of fun. There's murder mysteries. There's a lot of different players involved, a lot of different factions. We're not sure who's doing what. We're not sure why necessarily certain factions are involved, what their goals are. There's a lot of mystery involved. Even though mysteries are solved relatively rapidly, all of a sudden, towards the end of these books, they're done fairly well. It's a little fast sometimes, but I'll tell you, it spoiled me somewhat for other books. I've gone and read a few other things after some of these Kate Daniels books, and they feel like they're moving too slow. That's just relative. I've gotten used to the pacing, the extremely fast pacing in these Kate Daniels books, that when I get into a regular book with other authors that I love, like I'm reading Dawn Shard right now. Brandon Sanderson. Love Brandon Sanderson. Love everything Stormlight Archive related. It feels really slow to me right now. I know it's not moving slow, but it feels slow in comparison. So if you would like a really fast, fun read, this is a good one. I mentioned romance earlier, and this is kind of a fantasy romance. I would say it's mostly fantasy. These are known as romance authors, this Ilona and Andrew. There are definitely some of those elements in there, and I think I have a particular weakness for that. I've read some other books that I will review later that have a lot of this involved in them, and I think I like it. Now, I have read other fantasy that is much more strongly romance influenced, and I didn't like it at all. In fact, the same friend that recommended this series recommended, I believe it was Karen Chance, and I just couldn't get over how vapid the male characters were in the first book. There was nothing to them. They were almost like male body doubles. They were there for their sexuality and almost nothing else. I also didn't like the main character. Well, you know what? I'm not reviewing that book. I'm not reviewing that book right now. I'm not reviewing Karen Chance, so let's move on. Suffice it to say, my other ventures into fantasy/romance have not gone very well, with a few exceptions. I would say that there's an underlying burning romance behind Kingkiller Chronicles that I really like, and The Saracen Blade. If you've never read it, I will do a review on that one. It is phenomenal, and the author is phenomenal, and I haven't seen the movie, but I'm going to guess it's pretty good. I'm going to have to see it. So we've talked about pacing, and these are definitely very fast-paced books, including Magic Rises. As far as content, there's a lot of violence, and there is definitely some sex involved in this series. It's not something that, even though they're short books, I would have my younger kids reading. However, for any adult, they're fantastically fun. It's not too heavy on the sexual side, which has been my problem with a lot of the more romance-based fantasy stuff I've read before. They've concentrated too much on the sexual aspect. It's just not that interesting to me. I mean, fair is fair. Sex is wonderful, but it's not that great to read about most of the time. It's an interesting element. I don't think authors should necessarily skip over it if it's part of a relationship in the story, but it isn't the crux of the story. And it certainly isn't the crux of the story here. It is a necessary part of some of the relationships that are involved in the story. So there's a good balance here. I'd say they've struck a very good balance. And maybe that has something to do with it being a husband and wife writing team. You get both perspectives on this particular topic, and I think it's well written maybe because of that. Or partly because of that. Or maybe not. I don't know. I wasn't exactly in the room when they were writing it, so I'm just taking a wild guess. But other than pacing and some of the content that might be found in these books, characters. I'm a big character guy. I love character development. I love to go on the characters' journeys with them. Now, these characters, by their very nature, the vast majority of them are older. They're not developing as much anymore, and they're very set in their ways. They've had hard lives that have baked in certain things. So it's very hard for them to change. So their character development is largely based on them getting over some of these hurdles. Not all of them, not very well, not all the time. But they have to struggle to grow. And their struggle to grow, Kate Daniels and some of the others, Their struggle to grow is a big part of these books, and I find that very interesting. You don't have to have a ton of character development to have good character development, not in my opinion. As long as you have earned your development, whether it's just a little bit or a lot, as long as it fits the character, fits the story, fits the situation, as long as it fits and it works, it can still be good. So you don't have to take somebody who's got all kinds of issues and work through all of their issues. You don't have to take somebody who has all kinds of issues and rapidly work through any of those issues. Sometimes those issues are what make that character tragic, if they're going to be tragic. And sometimes tragic characters are great because they can't change. Because life is going to continue to beat them down because they can't change. Because situations are going to go bad, and you know it is because they can't change. Now these characters can change, but they're very, very slow about changing. Very, very slow. And that adds a lot of conflict in the story. And it's interesting conflict, and it's good conflict, and it's a lot of fun to read. So we've done character, pacing, content. What else is there? Plot? The plots are pretty good. The plots are pretty good. They're sort of murder mystery a lot of times in more than just this book. In Magic Rises, there are some murder mysteries involved. There's politics, some political machinations going on. Again, interestingly done. And they add another layer to the story. Relationships are key to this story. They're key to the entire series, not so much at first, but as you go along, and the main character, who is very isolated in the very beginning, completely alone for all intents and purposes, starts to develop relationships with other characters in the book. The development of those relationships is another interesting element. In every book, they develop further. Not very fast, but they develop further. Seeing all the other characters through Kate Daniels' perspective, you get to learn that there are more layers to the other characters. And I always enjoy that. Sometimes character development isn't development. Sometimes good character development is really just developing the reader's understanding of what this character actually is. Maybe the first couple chapters somebody is on the page. They're very two-dimensional. And then you learn more and more about them. They become more three-dimensional. I love those kinds of reveals. I love figuring out that this guy who I don't really like, all of a sudden I'm like, whoa, there's more to this person, and they are very interesting. And it makes you rethink everything they've done before. That can be a lot of fun, and you get a lot of that in this story. Back to Magic Rises. Magic Rises, like I said, is book 6. The characters in it are well established by the time you get to book 6. I would seriously recommend reading the other books first. Magic Rises is a really good installment in that series. It's a nice break from Atlanta because everything else takes place in Atlanta. It's a nice adventure. There are definitely very high stakes involved. It's very fast paced. These characters are interesting, and there's an intensity to all of them, a certain level of intensity that I find very engaging. Now, I'm trying to do a largely spoiler-free review, especially considering what I give away now will give away things in the previous books. So I'm not mentioning any particular names beyond Kate Daniels. She's the titular character. She's probably going to survive till book 6. I'm going to just go ahead and tell you, spoiler warning. Yeah, the Kate Daniels series, Kate Daniels is alive in book 6 of 10. As to doing reviews of the other books, I will probably do a rack and stack, which one is the best book tiered list. Maybe a 1 through 10, what's the best one, to 10, what's the worst one, which so far is probably still going to be pretty good. I will probably do a rack and stack with a real quick synopsis on all of them later on so that we can get a little bit of a review for the first 5. Unless you guys really want me to go through book 1 through 5 and do individual reviews, I can definitely do that. Just comment below and ask for it. If there's enough comments, enough support for that, I'll do it. But for book 6, I think it's a slightly stronger entry in the series than some of the others. And as for rating it, for rating books, I like to set 10 as an impossible measure. It has to be the best book of all time. 1 out of 10. 10 is the best book of all time. And everything else is going to be below that. So it's going to be maybe an amazing book will be a 9. Or a 9.5. Or a 9.8 even if it's so close to being perfect. So it's an almost impossible measure. 1 is bad. 1 is very bad. I'll give a book a 0 if I DNF it, do not finish, DNF. I'll give it a 0. But 5 is actually, that's kind of worth your time. I mean, it's, I enjoyed it enough that it wasn't a waste of time. So anything between 5 and 10 is generally a fairly good book. Anything below 5, I probably wouldn't have read had I known what I was getting into. So 5 is kind of that mark between it was worth my time, not worth my time. So for this book, they're definitely worth the time. There's not a lot of time you're going to spend on them because they're such fast reads. Again, that pacing is crazy. And they're so enjoyable. Now, they're not high fantasy. They're not these big, it's not a big epic series like some of the others that I love, like Stormlight Archive, Wheel of Time. It's just not that caliber necessarily. It's almost like it falls into a separate category. Like it shouldn't be compared to those, really. It should fall into its own category, which is more like the Dresden Files, which are pretty fast-paced reads as well. I'd put it more along Dresden Files. I love Dresden Files. I've read all of those books so far, and short stories, and I would put them... Am I going to put Kate Daniels on par with Dresden Files? That just seems bold. Very bold. But I've enjoyed them so much. Guilty pleasure. Maybe they're not the best written books ever, but they're really fun. They are so much fun. All right. If I put Dresden Files, some of the best Dresden Files in the, Changes is a solid 9. If I put Dresden Files Changes as a solid 9, I'm going to put Magic Rises 7. I'm going to make it a 7. Magic Rises is a 7. For now. Maybe it'll drop down later. And it largely gets the 2 extra bumps past 5, the 6 and 7 mark, because of its speed and fun. It's just a lot of fun to read. As far as recommendations, I recommend reading this one. Magic Rises. Although start with book number 1. I can't remember the title, but the Kate Daniels series, book number 1 in the series. Read that first and go on from there. They're all fast-paced. They're all a lot of fun. Some are slightly better than others. Magic Rises, one of the better ones. But do yourself the favor of starting at book 1. Do they save the children? Do they get this panacea? Do they make it back in time? Do they survive the trip at all? Well, you're going to have to read the book to get that because this is a somewhat spoiler-free review. That's it for book club today. I hope you enjoyed the suit. I dressed up nice for book club. If there's anything else you would like for me to review, let me know. I'll read it. If I've already read it, I'll go over it again real quick and I'll give you a nice review on it. Quick shout out to Eileen for recommending this author duo and this series. It definitely made my deployment go by a lot faster, and I've enjoyed it since. I am burning through the books. Like I said, I just finished with book 6. Please don't text me any spoilers.